What if the United States never provided support to Israel? What if one of the most defining alliances in geopolitical history never came to be? The relationship between the United States and Israel, marked by steadfast diplomatic and military support, has shaped not only the Middle East, but also America's global policies. Imagine how wildly different the world could look if, from Israel's founding in 1948, the U.S. chose a neutral, hands-off approach to the new state. Would Israel have survived? Would the U.S. have enjoyed closer ties with its Arab neighbors? And more importantly, how would global power dynamics have evolved in such a scenario? In this exploration, we peel back historical layers and imagine the geopolitical, economic, and ethical consequences of a United States that chose not to back Israel, inviting policy analysts to debate the moral and strategic implications of such a counterfactual world. To understand the stakes of a missed opportunity, or, alternatively, a calculated neutrality, we must start in 1948. Israel's declaration of independence set the stage for immediate territorial and existential conflict. Situated in a hostile region and surrounded by adversaries, the survival of this fledgling state seemed tenuous. The Truman administration was among the first to recognize Israel, providing the new nation with critical political legitimacy and securing its footing on the global stage. However, the U.S.-Israeli alliance that we know today was not instantaneous. In the early years, support was largely symbolic, and it wasn't until the 1960s that significant military and economic aid began flowing from Washington to Tel Aviv. Nevertheless, without even that initial American vote of confidence, Israel's path would undoubtedly have been steeper. But what if America had remained neutral? What if Truman and subsequent administrations had calculated that the costs of supporting Israel outweighed the benefits? To explore this, let's rethink the events of the post-war Middle East through a counterfactual lens. A world without U.S. assistance begins with an immediately dire scenario for Israel. Following its declaration of independence, Israel was invaded by 5 neighboring Arab countries: Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq. Without U.S. military or financial support, Israel would have faced a greater struggle in this critical war of independence. In this reality, Israel might have sought alternative partnerships. The Soviet Union, which had backed some of the Zionist movement's goals in the early stages, could have emerged as an unlikely ally. This partnership might have redefined Israel's political and ideological orientation, pulling it into the Eastern Bloc during the Cold War. Such an alignment would have drastically shaped the region, introducing a new dimension to rivalries between global powers. Conversely, without securing external state support, Israel may have been forced to double down on regional diplomacy. While challenging, this could have fostered a stronger focus on coexistence with Arab neighbors. Would peace negotiations have started earlier, or would Israel have been overwhelmed by its adversaries in the absence of sufficient military strength? Such questions are at the heart of this alternate history. Of course, these outcomes rest on one major assumption: that Israel survives at all. Without American recognition and support, Israel's adversaries might have felt emboldened to crush the embryonic state, rewriting the region's political map entirely. For the United States, a neutral stance toward Israel could have radically altered its position in the Middle East. By abstaining from supporting Israel, America likely would have courted warmer relations with Arab nations, many of whom viewed Israel as an unwelcome intrusion into their region. Such an approach might have provided the U.S. with enormous diplomatic leverage, particularly with oil-rich Gulf states that were critical economic partners. Stronger U.S.-Arab ties might have also mitigated some of the anti-American sentiment that has fueled terrorism and unrest over the decades. As a perceived neutral party in the Arab-Israeli conflict, the U.S. could have positioned itself as a more impartial broker, potentially facilitating negotiations that sought mutual coexistence rather than catering to one side. However, this neutrality comes at a cost. Without ties to Israel, the U.S. would have forfeited access to an invaluable ally in the Middle East, one that has provided intelligence, technological innovation, and military expertise in exchange for American support. Additionally, abandoning Israel could have worked against America's ideological commitment to democracy and its role as a moral leader during the post-World War II era, eroding its image among Western allies. a U.S. policy of neutrality wouldn't have existed in a vacuum. At the height of the Cold War, every American decision was calculated through the lens of its ideological conflict with the Soviet Union. Supporting Israel was, in part, a bid to counter Soviet influence in the region, which had garnered support from nations like Egypt and Syria. In an alternate scenario, where the U.S. abstained from this alliance, the Soviets might have sought to integrate Israel into their sphere of influence. Such a move would have not only reshaped the geopolitical dynamics of the Middle East, but also created a new and unexpected Cold War front. On the other hand, U.S. neutrality could have left the Middle East as a multipolar theater, where smaller nations jockeyed for influence without clear alignment to either superpower. Would this lack of binaries have led to greater regional stability or deeper chaos? The answer isn't simple, but this thought experiment forces us to reconsider assumptions about the roles that global superpowers play in perpetuating peace or conflict. Zooming out further, we consider how the absence of U.S. support for Israel would reshape the entire Middle East. Without American involvement, new regional powers might have emerged, and alliances between Arab nations might have solidified. Alternatively, a weaker Israel might have tempered its adversaries' animosity, reducing the likelihood of long-lasting animosity between Israel and its neighbors. Proxy wars between the U.S. and Soviet Union, which often found their battlegrounds in Middle Eastern countries, might have diminished without the charged atmosphere of the Arab-Israeli conflict. With less U.S.-Israeli alignment fueling these hostilities, could we imagine a Middle East where external interference was less destructive? Or perhaps, would these power struggles simply have unfolded in a different form, with different players? Additionally, the ripple effects of U.S. neutrality could have extended beyond the region. Would America's decision not to support Israel inspire similar neutrality when intervening in other theaters, such as Vietnam or Korea? A less interventionist America might have altered the trajectory of global politics far beyond the Middle East. Underpinning any predictions about the alternate reality we're exploring are deep moral and strategic dilemmas. U.S. support for Israel has always been framed both in terms of strategic national interest and shared democratic values. Without this alliance, could America truly portray itself as a defender of democracy on the world stage? Alternatively, would neutrality demonstrate a pragmatic shift toward non-interventionism, saving American lives and resources in the process? Policy analysts must also consider the consequences of abandonment. Would America's unwillingness to back Israel in its founding years encourage authoritarian regimes and trigger instability? Or would it signal a broader commitment to neutrality and non-intervention, setting a new standard in global diplomacy? These questions highlight the interplay between morality and realpolitik that defines U.S.-Israel relations. They also underscore the difficulty of creating consistent foreign policies in an ever-changing geopolitical arena. Finally, we turn to the present day. How might this vision of a neutral America offer lessons for policymakers grappling with global challenges today? Over the decades, U.S. support for Israel has become deeply ingrained in the political and cultural fabric of both nations. However, we are reminded in this thought experiment that no alliance is inevitable, and every policy decision carries long-term consequences. Today, as America navigates new global dynamics, from its competition with China to its energy transition policies, it's worth considering how current alliances could evolve. Will new partnerships emerge to supplement or even supplant long-standing ones? What overarching values should guide American foreign policy in a rapidly shifting global order? The question, what if the United States never provided support to Israel? Challenges us to reimagine one of the most consequential relationships in modern history. From the survival of Israel itself to the recalibration of U.S.-Arab relations, Cold War rivalries, and broader global dynamics. This alternate history reveals just how far-reaching the ramifications of foreign policy choices can be. For policy analysts, this is not merely a historical thought experiment. It's an invitation to critically assess the trade-offs inherent in current and future alliances. What are the moral, strategic, and economic calculations at play? How do we navigate the delicate balance between national interests and global commitments? And most importantly, how can we learn from the past to make better decisions for a more stable and inclusive future. Ultimately, pondering this alternate reality offers a powerful reminder. The effects of foreign policy are immense, stretching across borders and decades to shape not just the fate of nations, but the course of history itself. Like and subscribe for more from History Twist.